That was Deborah Cohen there. Now, if you're watching the corner of our screen, you'll see that we are counting down to zero. Just got less than 2 minutes to go to the 0-100 hours, that is 11 o'clock. Wherever you are this evening, you're probably within shouting distance of a group gathered in celebration or commiseration. These are some of the scenes tonight around the country. We dipped in earlier to Parliament Square in Westminster. You saw the pro-Brexit rally where Nick was. We're expecting to be joined shortly from there by Nigel Farage. In Edinburgh, a very different kind of gathering, the flag coming down at Holyrood, and you'll see plenty of salters there. And Cardiff, a very similar theme at the Welsh Assembly there, lowering the EU flag, raising the flag for Wales. Downing Street has a light display and a countdown clock. We have cameras in Cambridge, in Newcastle, in Lincolnshire, in Norwich, and we'll be dipping into some of those pictures as we go on. But we're joined tonight by the former Liverpool footballer John Barnes, the author Jeanette Winterson, and the Spike columnist Ella Whelan. We're all watching glued right now, and we're going to come to our guests in a few moments for your sense of what it feels like when we pass that hour of 11 o'clock. But right now, with just a few seconds to go, let's watch history being made. This is Richard Tyson, Parliament Square. The flares, the fireworks, and in the centre of it all, who else but Nigel Farage, of course, who will be joining us in a second. Our guests have been watching these scenes, and I've been watching their faces. So let me start first with you, Ella, the Brexiteer amongst this panel. Your first sense?
I think it's a great moment. I think that, you know, we can have a bit of giggle at the smoke machines and all the kind of the very enjoyable pomp of it, but at the heart of it, what this is for me, and I think for many Brexiteers, is not really anything to do with Nigel Farage or particular politicians of note, but the joyous victory of the populace, of the 17.4 million people and all the Remain voters that went along with them in support of democracy over the last few years, to, you know, give a bloody nose to the establishment and to finally, after several votes, win what we demanded in 2016.
Jeanette, do you feel that Britain's identity is being rewritten by what has happened tonight?
Gee, I'm much more upset about this than I thought I would be watching it happen. I don't think identity is going to be rewritten in any obvious way, because all the people who are Remainers are still Remainers. I'm still part of the European Union. My heart has not changed. My perspective hasn't changed. I would rather have been in a situation where we were working together on things that we thought collectively were important, that we had cultural differences, of course. But one of the great triumphs of the European Union, for all its flaws, and there are many, was that we could agree on things like environmental protection, workers' rights, that really mattered, food standards, animal welfare. You know, these were not things that were there. Well, these are not regulations, this is not red tape. These were things that we decided we could agree on. And what I'm sorry about is that the European Union was sold so much more simply as an economic project without realising this integration, which is of course what all the Leavers wanted to see destroyed, and it is now destroyed, was actually something valuable. And for me, look, we're looking at a world which is on the cusp of climate breakdown. It's a huge challenge of our time. We're also standing in a world where artificial intelligence is going to be present in all of our lives. These are the big issues. We have wasted, as far as I'm concerned, 3 million, what did Bloomberg say today? £200 billion in lost economy to the UK, which is more than we have paid into the EU since the 70s. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, for me, it's those grades, it's an expensive spirit in a waste of shame.
John, let me bring you in, because you said at the time that you thought Brexit could be good for English football, but not for the country. Has that changed, or do you?
Not at all. Not at all. It may be good for English football, but of course, just talking about what we just witnessed a couple of minutes ago, just reminded me of New Year, where we got very excited, and then we had the countdown, and at the end of it was just time for bed. Nothing has changed.
Is that
now
a good
we have
thing
less
or a bad
European
thing?
Union.
I mean,
Well, I think it's a bad thing. But in terms of, and when you're talking about a victory is when they're proved to be right, and that's going to be done in 11 months or a year's time, when you can then see the benefits of us leaving the EU. There's no victory now, because either we're all going to be winners, because if it turns out to be the right move, whereby, you know, in terms of the economy going up and education and services improving, then the Brexiteers are all right. But if that doesn't happen, then we're all losers.
What we don't know at the moment, Ella, is whether we will become smaller and more inward-looking, or global and more outwards-looking.
Of course, the future of a post-Brexit Britain is all to play for, and Brexit, the vote to leave the European Union, that in one sense technical process, is never going to be the magic pill or the death knell of the future of British politics. It wasn't going to, you know, we're not going to wake up tomorrow and suddenly have new housing policy, for example. What it has done is set a new scene for British politics, in which you have a much bigger space for working class voters and ordinary people who only really have their voice at a ballot box, to have that feeling of more, more political power and more of a stake in what happens in the future. I mean, in terms of British identity, we've left the European Union, which is an institution formalised around, from my perspective, the interests of capitalists. Outside of it, we can still very much be European.
Do you call yourself European?
Yeah, absolutely. My family's Irish, so I've got a particular stake in that.
Can I just ask you a question here? You think that someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's an ardent Brexiteer, isn't a capitalist?
Yeah, well, this is the argument is that obviously the strange thing for people like me who are on the left and are also Brexiteers, and you find yourself in bed with the weirdest.
Is that where you want to be?
But the important point is, I think that what Brexit's done is it's created a new divide in politics, which is an us and them. If there's anything that we've learnt from the last 3.5 years, is that talk about divisions. I don't think it's Brexit and Remain anymore, thankfully. What it is a kind of an elite which is still hell-bent on trying
Just a minute, you're really saying...
trying to talk about prejudice, about people being small-minded.
You can't use these words about elite.
Actually, I'm far more optimistic.
Go on.
When you talk about an elite, this always astonishing me, this idea of an elite. You know, we had Ivanka Trump moaning the other day about elites. I mean, who is more elite than a girl who only went to posh schools and has ever worked for her father? You know, this elite is being used continually against people who are actually educated, thoughtful, reflective and interested in the future. Elite is not somebody who is Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson. You know, these people are the establishment.
Exactly, but the fact is, without wanting to rerun the referendum, because I think none of us want to do that, I certainly don't, you had the entirety of the political establishment, most of the banks, huge amount of celebrities for as much as they're worth, backing Remain, telling people that they had to vote Remain. Brexit was a huge revolt. It was a revolution.
We're here to talk, when you talk about identity, I'm looking at Parliament Square, was that? I didn't see many people who looked like me. So what is this new British identity we're talking about? A lot of the people who voted Leave, a lot of them remember the good old days of what Britain was like in the old days, and I want to go back to that, where 75% of people who look like me, 75% of people voted to Remain because we don't feel enfranchised. We feel that we're being discriminated against. Not me, because I'm John Barnes, so that's fine. But I'm talking about people in the inner cities, black people, Muslims. They feel disenfranchised, and 75% of them voted to Remain. So the idea of an identity of who we are when we're talking about we have decided to go, and 60% in Scotland, 60% in Northern Ireland. So the whole idea of a new British identity, that's what's going to be important, because a British identity cannot go back to the old days in terms of what people wanted. And I think a lot of people who voted leave are hankering for those days again.
What about
quite a
Scotland,
charge,
though?
Anna.
Because
It is quite a charge, and I've had anecdotally, I've had a very different experience. I struggle to meet the kind of rabid racist that Brexiteers get painted as. More often than not, people are talking about this in terms of democracy, in terms of making Britain better for everyone. I think certainly there is a sense of, outside of the European Union, there's as much scope, if not more, for being an internationalist nation, something that's genuinely involved in being internationally involved, not just within Fortress Europe, but to all corners of the world.
But Europe's
I think
not a
that's
fortress.
perfectly possible.
Europe was a huge project. It was not a fortress.
Are you
but
aware of its immigration policy?
Yes, I am.
Yeah,
but
I mean, that's why it's called
but
Fortress
why do you
Europe.
imagine? Why do you imagine that aligning ourselves with the USA is going to make us somehow more international?
I've got no interest in the USA. What I've got is an interest in workers in this country feeling more politically empowered post-Brexit.
Even when they now find that all the regulations that were protecting them, which did come from the European Union, are going to go out of the window.
They had their vote, now they've got it, and let's make something
That's
good out of it.
terrifying.
I'm going to bring you all gently to a close. We're going to go to Parliament Square now and join Nigel Farage. It seems fitting perhaps that we end our show with the man with which it all began. Your first reaction tonight, Nigel, we're about, 4 minutes into Brexit Britain?
Yeah, amazing feeling. I mean, this is something the establishment never wanted. They fought against, but a grassroots rebellion of ordinary people has made it happen, and this is the greatest moment of history in modern Britain. It's a big day.
You are now the establishment. The fight was always the anti-establishment against the EU. Now you are the establishment, so I guess you have to own this. Does that change who we have to see as the underdog from now on?
Well, the truth of it is, we've won the war. We now have to win the peace. Yes, there are big negotiations to go on. All of that's important. The Conservative Party now sounds like the Brexit Party. These are massive, seismic shifts in British politics. But I tell you what, tonight we passed the point of no return. We're never going back, and the rest, important though it is actually detail.
Anne Widdecombe was saying today that she thought at times Brexit would never happen. Did you think at times it wouldn't happen?
This time last year, I was really scared it would never happen. Really scared, and that's why I launched the Brexit Party. Within 6 weeks, we'd won the European elections, got rid of Mrs May, and now we got Boris singing our song. If he delivers, I couldn't be happier.
Theresa May tweeted this evening, after 3 years, we finally delivered on the result of the referendum. Who do you feel you have to thank this evening?
Well, it's not Theresa May, who tried to give us a Remainers Brexit. We never believed in it. Look, we did what we did with the Brexit Party. We reset the agenda. The Conservatives looked in the mirror. They realised if they didn't adapt and change, they'd die. They've done it. And so there are lots of people to thank. The great news is we're free.
Does it matter to you if going forwards, if gradually Britain does become a less significant power on the world stage now? It might not happen, but there are many leaders warning us that it will. Does that matter to you?
As a member of the European Union, Britain's voice on the world stage had been muted. We can now reach out to the Commonwealth, America, many other places as a free independent nation, not stuck inside the orbit of the European Union. We've got a chance again to become a real voice in the world, not just a star on somebody else's flag.
And let me ask you, your work here presumably is done. We understand in the States in the last few moments they've decided the vote has come through in the impeachment trial not to call witnesses. Are you going to be working for Donald Trump now? Are you going to be by his side at the rallies for the next few months?
No. This is all media speculation. I want to say this to you. In 2016, I gave the impression I'd walked away from the battle after the referendum and believing Theresa May. I will not be walking away. I will comment on this all the way through. I'll praise the Prime Minister or I'll criticise the Prime Minister. I'm not going away.
they've just shouted Nigel behind you, so I guess you have work to do with whatever they're expecting you to stay and do right now. Nigel Farage, thank you very much indeed, and sorry to end so abruptly with our guests there, Ella Whelan, John Barnes and Jeanette Winterson. Thank you all. Before we go, let's just take you through the front pages. The Guardian, and I think we're putting them up for you, but I have them right here in front of me. The Guardian has the EU flag waving in the wind above the Parliament, and it says, "The day we said goodbye." The Sun has "Make leave, not war." Weekend FT, Britain finally cuts EU ties. The Daily Mirror, a moment of history. The Times, farewell to EU, little Fiat 500 there. A last word from our panel then. At what point do we say this has been a success, this has worked?
I think to the extent to which voters in this country refuse to be trodden down, refuse to be silenced, I think it's been a great success for the everyman.
Are you giving it your vote now?
Well, the one thing I'm looking forward to is that Boris has said that he'll take VAT from women's sanitary products. So maybe we'll get something out of this after all.
Nigel Farage said we've won the war, now we've got to win the peace. We haven't won the war, we've won the battle. The war is that after 11 months, after 2 years, what happens to the country economically? What happens to the inner cities? What happens to services? That's when you've won the war. This is not the war, this is just a battle.
Great to have you all here. Right. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. That is it from Brexit night. Emma's back on Monday and I'll be in Iowa, where the Democratic presidential primaries are getting underway. Till then, we leave you with the scene at the European Council building in Brussels from earlier this evening. Bye-bye from all of us here.